all of a sudden it was hundreds to thousands of dollars to make a transaction on Bitcoin. And I don't think that everyone was quite ready for that. And so I think that people are kind of waking up that even though the fees are low right now, that's not always going to be the case, and they need to be prepared. I've been in Bitcoin since about 2012, so I was pretty early into getting involved with Bitcoin. Kind of credit card, debit card scenario is more like Lightning, and then the banking system is more like Bitcoin. The Bitcoin base layer is the ultimate kind of a surety, and you're moving maybe larger amounts there, but then also you're using Lightning for more of the daily transactions and things like that. If you don't have anywhere to use it, well, it's not going to be adopted. We need something to be able to scale it and scale it well. The use case for gold has like gone down while Bitcoin is like just starting and like its use case and what it can do. It's pretty obvious that we need some sort of like L2 or some other solution of actually doing these transactions that are not always on the Bitcoin base layer.
I think it's really interesting when we talk about Bitcoin, because we kind of, I think there's a consensus that we cannot scale Bitcoin on layer one, that we kind of have to scale up in layer twos. And I think the winner might be Lightning. I think that Lightning has a really good chance to be number one of the layer twos. Before we dive into Lightning and the developments there, maybe let's take a small step back and talk about how in general you see Bitcoin scaling to the future will look like, because we have the limited base layer.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that there's obviously been a lot of conversations about how we scale Bitcoin for many years. I mean, I think the biggest one, the most notable one, is like the block size wars, and talking about, do we make the blocks bigger? Do we do something else? And like, how do we scale? How do we get more transactions in on basically on chain or inside of the Bitcoin ecosystem, one way or the other? I think the Lightning is definitely the prominent way of doing that. It's obviously the most used, like L2 today. I guess maybe to even take a step back from that, it's pretty obvious that we need some sort of like L2 or some other solution of actually doing these transactions that are not always on the Bitcoin base layer. At the time of recording, the mempool is like pretty light right now, but that's not always going to be the case. That has not always been the case. So we need to have some other method of actually increasing the amount of, not only the amount of transactions we can do in Bitcoin, but then also like the speed and the fees and all these different variables. We see Lightning as definitely being the number one solution for that. And it's been pretty obvious in terms of adoption. There's some other solutions like Liquid or some like state chain based proposals been out there, but none of them have shown to be actually all that good or all that useful. So we see Lightning, and that's the most adopted L2 that exists on Bitcoin. So we see it as definitely the winner there, and we're heavily kind of doubling down on Lightning being the winner there, because we think that it is the best method of actually moving value in the world, not only just Bitcoin, but just value in general.
Interesting. Why do you think Lightning will be winners? Like the other ones are technically not as capable, or is it already the network effect of Lightning being early and being already so adopted?
Yeah, I mean, I think the network effects that Lightning has are definitely one of the big advantages it has. But I think that there's a lot of other proposals out there that come with a lot of trade-offs. So like Fediment is an example of a federation type model, which I think is very interesting. I think that that's absolutely a solution that will work and be prevalent, but it's obviously a very, very trusted system, and so it's not doesn't come with the same properties that exist in Bitcoin from like the base layer perspective. You're obviously trusting a group of people with kind of your funds at that point. So those things I think will be used. They will be around. I don't think that they kind of solve Bitcoin scaling in the ways of keeping the same properties that exist inside of Bitcoin, like Lightning does, like with unilateral exit opportunities and things like that. So being able to keep the same properties, Lightning's the only one that can do that. Anything that's like state chain based or anything like that is inherently more trusted. Same thing with Liquid. There's a federation behind it and things like that. So not saying those are all like will never work. Like they can obviously work, but they come with a lot of trade-offs that you need to kind of consider. And those are some trade-offs that not a lot of people are going to be willing to go with, where they want, complete control of their funds and things like that Lightning is able to bring. So I think it's there will be other solutions, but it's something that every user is going to have to really evaluate in terms of what are the trade-offs and where do you want to interact at.
Maybe a question that I should have started, like people in the comments are always roasting me that I never let the guests introduce themselves, because I usually think it's like I kind of like, I care about the opinions and not like what he's working at, and like it kind of gets boring for me. But I think the people actually care about that stuff. So maybe it's also interesting. Like, what are you doing, and what are you kind of like doing in the in the Bitcoin Lightning space, and what is Voltage, also the sign right behind you, doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So my name's Graham. I'm founder and CEO of Voltage. And so Voltage is an infrastructure provider, a payment processor for Lightning and Bitcoin transactions. So I've been in Bitcoin since about 2012. So I was pretty early into getting involved with Bitcoin. I've been involved in the ecosystem, writing open source tech, doing a bunch of just different things, and kind of just participating anywhere I could. And I kept hitting the same issue over and over again of anytime you want to build applications on top of Bitcoin, it was always a big hurdle just to get up and running with, configuring Bitcoin Core, or even doing a Lightning node and setting up the channels and doing all the things that go into that. It was always very challenging. And so that's where I kind of had the idea for Voltage. Is we want a really easy way of just being able to plug into the Bitcoin network, very easily hit some APIs and be able to send and receive transactions. So that was the kind of original idea for Voltage, is just making building applications on Bitcoin far easier than it was previously. So kind of where we're at today, we're the largest infrastructure provider for Lightning. And so we have both like a node service that is able to like run nodes, host them, help people with some of the liquidity and like all of those different things. But then we also have some new things that we're working on that are even like simplified versions of Lightning and being able to integrate there. So we got kind of across the board a lot of different solutions. But at the end of the day, we help businesses incorporate Lightning into their products and services far easier and far faster than they would be doing it with any other provider or doing it themselves. So we've been able to really, take hold of that and really focus on incorporating Lightning into these businesses that either already move a bunch of Bitcoin, they want to do it faster and cheaper, or they're looking for efficiencies that maybe they don't have in their business already.
That's a great thing to do. I think like Lightning is such and it's really early stage, because most people like still are like on base layer, and as you mentioned, the fees are really low right now, so you can actually make a bunch of on-chain transactions. But I do think long term the fees are really headed into the hundreds, maybe even like thousands of dollars per transactions. I don't know what this will be then in Satoshis, but like in fiat terms, the transactions volume, the transaction fees will be, I think, quite high once there's a lot of volume on Bitcoin, and once people also starting to use it as a medium of exchange and not just storing it. If you just store it, you don't you don't transact too much. But even if the whole world just uses it as a store of value, you will still have a lot of traffic going around where you need a layer 2. And I think it's really important to build out those medium of exchange tools really early on. I like that you're doing that, and then you're already developing in there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I definitely agree that I think that there's been a lot of different cycles of Bitcoin fees going up and going down. Right now, we're in a pretty low fee environment, but I think that we've seen a lot of people still waking up to the fact that that's not always going to be the case. Like with the last fee spike, it was kind of created by like the ordinal craze and people doing a bunch of ordinal creation on chain. That caught people completely off guard, where all of a sudden it was hundreds to thousands of dollars to make a transaction on Bitcoin. And I don't think that everyone was quite ready for that. And so I think that people are kind of waking up that even though the fees are low right now, that's not always going to be the case, and they need to be prepared. So we definitely see that resonating with customers.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, because since around half a year, or like three quarters of a year, something like that, are getting paid in Bitcoin now, and we did it always on chain. But if the fees ran up to a crazy amount, like we have to do this on Lightning, and we had kind of have to move that, because like the things are not that good. But since I get paid in Bitcoin, the fees are actually really low. So it has been quite nice to have like the payment coming in and directly in your self custody solution. That's a an amazing experience. But I think Bob Burnett really puts it nicely of like, we are used to rolling in a Rolls Royce. That's a luxury item. And we will not all do that for all transactions. Like base layer Bitcoin transaction is like a luxury thing, and we should not get used to that. That's a thing where you like transact big things, or like once a month maybe you get money out there for your wallet or something like that. Do you also see it like that, like where Bitcoin is like the main layer where you save money, and then like you have the layer 2 where for your day-to-day spending for like three months or stuff like that, and maybe you even have on top of Lightning something for the daily transactions?
Yeah, I mean, I do see it very similar. I think that I think that as volumes increase on the Bitcoin base layer, it will be harder and harder to get your transactions in, especially when you think about when you talk about medium of exchange or something like that, being able to use it for more of a kind of everyday payment mechanism. Even let's say even the block space is clear, or there's relatively low activity, you still have to wait an hour at least for block confirmations to feel confident in that payment being confirmed. And so that alone, even in a low fee environment, that alone is very, very, Lightning is sub-second, and so that experience is far, far better. And so I do think that I agree that there's the way that I kind of think about it is the Bitcoin base layer is sort of like the banks and how they're all connected. Like people are generally not doing like ACH transfers or something like that on a daily basis. They're usually doing that, pretty infrequently, and it's generally larger amounts of money or wire transfers or something like that, where, you use a credit card or a debit card every day or very, very frequently. And so I think that the kind of credit card, debit card scenario is more like Lightning, and then the banking system is more like Bitcoin, where you have the Bitcoin is the ultimate, the Bitcoin base layer is the ultimate kind of a surety, and you're moving maybe larger amounts there, but then also you're using Lightning for more of the daily transactions and things like that. But I also think that you can move significant amounts of money on top of Lightning. Like you can do millions of dollars in payments on Lightning. And so it doesn't completely rule it out from doing larger payments, but just kind of comparing, the two there, that's the way that I've kind of been thinking about it, is it's really like a banking versus like a credit card.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. Now let's come to Lightning, where in the development we currently are, and then maybe afterwards where we kind of headed of where we talk a lot about where Bitcoin is and the adoption cycle and nation states and they adopting it and stuff like that. And with Lightning, we usually like just talk about like, oh yeah, like there are those apps, and but where in the adoption cycle of Lightning are we in general, where we are at with Lightning?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like Lightning has been, more or less usable since about 2018. So it has been around for a little while. That said, it has taken a while to get it to be really usable and getting a lot of service providers to leverage it. So where we're at now, I mean, the 2024 was a pretty big year for Lightning, where we had a lot of just larger scale exchanges, payment processors, those kinds of folks starting to adopt it. And we think that this 2025 is going to be an even larger year, where we see a huge amount of influx of people supporting it and adopting it. And so it's kind of one of those things where you need like the flywheel to build, where you need more wallets to support it, so then more exchanges can support it, and then you have more opportunity to use it, because that's been one of the hardest parts of adoption is, if you don't have anywhere to use it, well, it's not going to be adopted. You got to have kind of both ends of a transaction to make it useful. And so we're starting to see that. We've seen that at the kind of the second half of 2024 was pretty significant, and we think that that's going to carry into 2025 and be a pretty big deal. There's also one of the hardest parts of like quantifying the adoption rate or how much usage Lightning Network gets, because it's a peer-to-peer network. It's not a public blockchain. Like when you look at Bitcoin Layer 1 or Ethereum, Solana, you name any chain out there, almost all of them are public blockchains. And so you can see exactly who is transacting where and when. And so you can really get a good understanding of, Bitcoin is moving, $50 million today, it's moving $100 million today, whatever it is. With Lightning, since the entire system is peer-to-peer, there's no public metrics on like how many transactions are happening, all of those different things. And so it's because it's just between me and the sender and the recipient are the only ones that really know about it. So the ways of quantifying it are much, much harder. The public metrics of Lightning are like node count, channel count, and then channel capacity. those are all like okay metrics, but they don't really actually tell you how much is being used behind the scenes. And so that's one of the also parts that's really hard to quantify. And we have a report coming out in about in a couple of weeks or so with Fidelity that will really highlight a lot of the kind of the underlying usage behind it, where we're seeing a very, very steady increase in transaction volume on Lightning today. And we think that that's going to really explode in this next year.
Interesting. And how do you get those numbers? Like, how do you try to figure out where we are with this usage numbers as you described that it's kind of hard?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you basically have to be like operating a node or operating a system like us. And so since we are the largest provider for Lightning transactions today, we have a huge amount of data. And so just looking at kind of like a subset of like anonymized data, it's like generally how many transactions are happening in a week or a month or anything like that on Lightning. And so the only way to really get that data is to either be running a node yourself and kind of keeping track of that yourself, or like a service provider like us that can actually, that is processing payments for other folks and being able to aggregate that data.
How fast are we currently growing? If you see the data of like how many more transactions are being made and stuff like that, I think it's also interesting to know from that the Bitcoin adoption cycle, because I think it correlates to a certain to a certain extent. Because if more people use Bitcoin on Lightning, this also means more people in general use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange already, which is super fascinating to see. How fast is kind of the growth rate of those numbers currently?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing, so like even mentioning like one of the public reports was like Rivers report in 2024. I think it showed like 1,200% growth over the last 2 years. And we're seeing that continuing. And I think that we've started to, in just the tail end of 24, we saw that starting to increase. And we think that that will continue to increase with things like stablecoins on top of Lightning, which we'll get into a little bit later, but being able to really have some new assets to move as well, I think will really significantly increase it. So, I mean, we're seeing like thousands of percent increase across since inception. And then we're starting to even to go into the direction of thousands of percent increase year over year as well. So, I mean, we're seeing it very substantially pick up. And I think that ultimately like the value add is, being able to move any kind of value faster and cheaper, where you can basically send $1 million, have it settle, in under half of a second and pay zero fees on it. That's very, very significant. And people are starting to wake up into how that impacts their business.
How important do you feel is the Lightning adoption for the Bitcoin adoption and the Bitcoin narrative overall?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty important because, I mean, like since inception, I mean, Bitcoin has always had kind of the digital gold comparison, which I think is valid, but there's so much more that is there as well. And people try and put it into a specific bucket, which Bitcoin is very unique in that it can kind of fit into a lot of buckets. It can do a lot of different things. And so I think it's very important for the overall kind of Bitcoin investment thesis or just view, and that it can be very versatile and can do these different things. And so, and then also when we think about, large scale global adoption of Bitcoin, we need something to be able to scale it and scale it well. And so that's where we're seeing Lightning kind of taking hold. And so there's a huge amount of opportunity for that to really resonate with investors or just people looking at Bitcoin, and the fact that there is a way of you just storing it, holding onto it, and it's incredibly safe. But then also, if you want to use it or if you want to move it anywhere, you can do that pretty efficiently as well. So I think it's very important to have both of those aspects.
Yeah, it's Bitcoin is so unique because we never had such an asset which is open, digital, limited, strictly limited, and accessible to everyone. It's an asset that everyone needs, even though they might not know it yet, and that is also accessible for everyone and is still completely limited, and there's no way of manipulating it, and there's no way to make more of it. That in itself is so interesting, and I think that's why people are so bad in describing what Bitcoin really is. Like, you have so many different descriptions. Like even if you look at that podcast, I'm closing down on like 400 episodes now, and I often ask, yeah, like what is Bitcoin? Like what is the most exciting point of Bitcoin? Like what is the interesting aspect that you see in Bitcoin? And there are like 400 different explanations of that,
Yeah.
and it's really fun to see that.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that, and I think that's one of the great properties of Bitcoin is just how versatile it is. And then, and that is interesting to know when you ask someone, what is Bitcoin? The difference in answer shows kind of where where they view it as, like, where is it important to them, whether it's like an investment or means of value or something like that, or transfer. So I think that's very interesting, and that's what's, I think, been really hard for more traditional investors, people that are just in traditional finance, to like understand Bitcoin, because it's so different than anything else that has ever existed, and it's really hard for some people to wrap their minds around.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. Yeah, and yeah, like usually there's like a management team behind that kind of crafts the story. And like if there's like a Tesla or like Uber or like some stock out there, they usually have a story for that. They usually try to convey a story to the investors, but there's nobody conveying a story to Bitcoin investors. I mean, there are like a bunch of people that try to convey that, but because there's so many and so many different ones, it's not one story. And I think that's a confusing part. And people are always like, oh, like there's also gold, but gold has been around for so long, so the story has kind of been built, what gold is, and it has been ingrained for like thousands of years in civilization and in the human spirit, where Bitcoin is really new. And go out there, ask 100 people what Bitcoin is, and you get like 100 different answers. Most of them probably really really uninformed. That shows you how early we are, but it's an exciting time to be alive and to witness this kind of Bitcoin transformation, this kind of financial revolution. I do think we are in a special part of history.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. That's why it's one of the most exciting places to be building a company and working in. I mean, there's so much going on, and it's interesting when people compare it to gold. It's like, yeah, gold has been around for thousands of years, and it's less utility now than it used to, because people used to actually transact with gold. They used to have like gold coins and things like that, and now it's like you don't really do any of that today. It's more of just that store of value. And so the use case for gold has like gone down, while Bitcoin is like just starting and like its use case and what it can do. So I think it's really interesting to compare the two, because they're so different at the end of the day.
Absolutely. What is for you outside of Lightning? Maybe what is the most exciting aspect for you for Bitcoin, or like maybe what captured your attention at first with Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I've been like a tech enthusiast, a software engineer for a really really long time, and that was just what originally brought interest to me in Bitcoin. Is just the complete newness of the protocol itself and the network and just what it can do. Like, there's obviously nothing that had existed before it. That was very very exciting to me, and then just being able to I was just fascinated by the fact that someone could move value from one place to another without having any intermediary or someone to be able to deny the payment or claw it back or do any of those things. And the ability of it to be a truly peer to peer means of moving value was incredibly interesting to me. And that was what originally kind of kicked it off. And then once you start to like actually research, how does this work? Like, how is like the consensus ran? There's like all these miners, like the rabbit hole just goes very, very deep, as we all know. And there's just like an endless amount of things that you can learn. And so it was like the first thing that caught my eye was just this global payment system that you could just move money anywhere in the world. That was like, holy cow, that's incredibly massive. It's insane. How does this work? And then then it's kind of like game over. You're like researching, how does this all work? And then you get into like the economics of it, of like the fixed supply and all of these things, and it's just kind of like endless from there. So I originally, there's a couple people always approach it either from what I see, either from like the investment standpoint or like that fiscal policy standpoint of like, oh, it's important because there is a fixed supply, you can't make more of it, those kinds of things. And there's the other people of coming at it from the tech side of whether it's the privacy tech or just the ability of like uncensored money, those kinds of things. And so people come at it from like either tech or investment, I guess. And I was definitely on the tech side. I remember the day that Bitcoin broke $5 a coin, and I wish that I could see, I put my life savings into it, but I didn't, just because it was this cool technology. And I was not thinking at all about the ramifications of it from like a monetary policy perspective. So I was definitely a big tech nerd, and that's why I got into it in the first place.
How was that? Seeing Bitcoin break $5 and then also seeing Bitcoin break $100,000. How was that? Those feelings?
I mean, it was awesome. Like when it broke $5, I remember actually kind of complaining about it, because it was like this hobby, this thing that I like to do is getting expensive. It was like, if you're like doing like something is like wood is getting if I'm like a carpenter in my free time and wood is getting expensive, I'm gonna complain. So I was like kind of complaining about like Bitcoins are getting expensive, and I want to like keep playing and doing all these different things with it. So originally it was like I was a little upset, which is just crazy to think about. And then now when I just recently passed $100,000, I don't know. I feel like I've been through so many of like the ups and downs when it broke $1,000 and then $10,000 and so on. It's unfortunate that I feel a little like, I don't know, it's just kind of like all cycles of just the ups and downs. But it was an incredible accomplishment to really to see it to see it do that, to see the value and people actually valuing it at this level, and fulfill a lot of the things that we were thinking about back in 2012. So it was really exciting at the same time of, we go through a lot of cycles, but actually seeing it across this milestone was pretty cool to see.
I sometimes ask myself if Satoshi knew what was coming, if he actually had planned of like all the adoption cycles of like what in Bitcoin is coming. I'm always, when I think about the history, I'm like, did he foresee that? What was his plan there? That's kind of crazy. Maybe he was just let's do something and let's try to fix the system. And he never anticipated it for it being so big. He just wanted to make a good alternative to that. It's kind of fascinating to see, especially if you're like, it reached $1, then it reached $10, 1,000, then 100,000, and it's like, that was real quick, like 15 years. It's not that long of a time. And now presidents are talking about it, nation states are talking about it. That's kind of amazing. How do you actually see if like El Salvador is doing Bitcoin developments, but also now in America, nations that are doing it, is that impacting also the Lightning adoption, or how do you look at those things in the adoption cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. I think that like so like El Salvador, for example, they with their whole legal tender and things like that, that obviously was a big deal for Lightning because it was kind of making it usable in everyday scenarios, like putting it into storefronts and all of those things. So that was very impactful for Lightning and actually being able to. I mean, the rollout of that was like very debatable whether that was like successful or not. But like ultimately, being able to have it as a medium of exchange is very, very good for Lightning. On the flip side, here in the United States, they're talking about adding it to like a Bitcoin strategic reserve, which is very interesting. But like, I wouldn't say that that is on its own very impactful for Lightning because that's not putting it into storefronts. It's not doing all those things. It's just literally the government buying, X amount of Bitcoin and just keeping it in like a treasury or something, a vault, so to speak. So it's a little bit different of like ways of approaching it. But overall, I think that it is incredibly important that we see people like both the U.S. government and El Salvador government. There's countless other ones that have talked about it at least. And that's a huge validation point, I think, in the ways that they're talking about it. It used to be that these governments like Russia and China were talking about how can we shut this down? How can we like kick miners out? How can we like get rid of this thing entirely? Now the conversation is almost flipped in that, how can we as a country leverage Bitcoin to increase like, our reserve assets, like our ability to thrive as a country. So it's like the conversation is entirely flipped and looking at it from how can we actually benefit from this instead of how can we shut it out. So I think that that is one of the most positive things that have come out of this is we see, kind of world leaders looking at Bitcoin and seeing how they can actually use it for good instead of just how do we get rid of this. So that's really exciting to me to see that kind of the story come around and how they're looking at it.
Yeah, I guess I guess the implications are more indirect. Like you get the if America actually buys Bitcoin, and this will probably impact the price and everything, like the adoption cycle also. This indirectly pushes Lightning adoption only because like there's money now coming in the system. It flourishes the whole industry and therefore also all companies. But it doesn't do it directly. It's kind of like an indirect side way of that, because I do see unfortunately, the price of Bitcoin being the massive marketing tool, and everything else is kind of coming towards that by its nature. Where do you see kind of Lightning headed? You talked about like you see a massive growth ahead in this year and the next coming years. Where do you see that for Lightning?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that we've been kind of talking with our customers and our businesses is basically if you're moving kind of any amount of Bitcoin, you have the opportunity of saving quite a bit of money and then also provide a better user experience by integrating the Lightning Network. So we see that really resonating with folks, and we think that that's going to really help the adoption cycle of really just understanding what is the business impact of Lightning. When Lightning was early, it was always kind of the pitch was always just it's cool, like it's it's better, it's faster, but like there wasn't much pitch besides it was just really cool to integrate Lightning because that's like the future of Bitcoin. But now I think that we're able to really point to very specific metrics on how it can actually impact your business, how it can make you more money, which is from a business standpoint, that's what ultimately really matters to them. And so I think that that's going to help the adoption quite a bit by again having those like more players in the ecosystem. You can move it to and from more places and whatnot. So that's going to be a really, really big deal. And we think that there will be a lot of I think advancements coming. So like stable coins on top of Lightning, for example, by leveraging the Taproot Assets protocol, that's going to be, I think, an incredibly large unlock for the Lightning Network and its growth. That's because stable coins are the most used for the most used use case for Bitcoin, or I'm sorry, crypto in general today, where they've all been on like Tron and Ethereum and all these other chains. But now we're able to do that on top of Bitcoin and then the Lightning Network, which brings a huge amount of liquidity and a huge amount of usage into the network itself. And so you're able to get like these benefits of the Lightning Network, which is near instant settlement and very, very low to zero fees on your transactions. If you can do that with the largest use case for crypto today, that's incredibly massive, and I think that will really take the adoption of the network itself to a whole new level, and also be somewhat of a Trojan horse of getting people to actually start using Lightning and Bitcoin by first, kind of having stablecoins come in, and then they see the value, and then they can start integrating with Bitcoin much more easily. So that's, I think, a big catalyst that we see coming up for Lightning adoption as well.
Interesting. Also, the stable coins on Lightning is fascinating. I mean, I do see stable coins kind of like Blu-ray. You know what I mean? Like we had in this like the Blu-ray discussion, and then on top of that there might come there's the digital camera, and Blu-ray was kind of like this thing in between. And I do see stable coins as exactly that.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting, and like that's something that we're in the early innings of, as Tether just announced they'll support it. I think last week or the week before, and so we're seeing a lot of people being very, very interested in it. So I'm very excited to see where that goes, and I think it'll be a pretty big deal for the network.
Yeah, for the Lightning Network, it's probably really cool that Tether looks at that. But I do see like. Oh, like if we move towards like more of a Bitcoin standard, I see like all the extensions of fiat, and stablecoins are for me like such an extension of that. But it definitely drives a lot of adoption in Lightning, which is ultimately also great for Bitcoin. That's a really cool aspect of it. It's interesting that they now move to Lightning. I mean, they have their own chain. Like how does this even work with stable coins on Lightning? It's a weird concept for me in my brain.
Yeah, definitely. It's quite a unique concept, and it's like the whole, like from kind of the technical side, it's all powered by the Taproot Assets protocol, which was developed by like Lightning Labs. And what that does is it basically allows you to verifiably issue assets on Bitcoin, the layer one. And so you could, the way that, stablecoins work generally is like there's a company like a Tether that has a bunch of like, US dollars or something, similar in a bank account. And then they're issuing, kind of a token on like Ethereum or a Solana or something that is backed by that dollar. You were basically able to do a similar thing with Bitcoin, leveraging Taproot, which is the most recent upgrade to Bitcoin. And so by doing that, you can have these verifiable proofs of which assets are where and all of those different things. And so you can now take that into the Lightning Network as well and have that kind of same assurance of verifiability of assets and all that inside of Lightning. And so it's a pretty deep concept that Lightning Labs does a pretty good job of publishing some videos on how it works and developer breakdowns and all those things that I would recommend anyone go check out. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's Taproot that enables this to be possible, and having these verifiable proofs that can be validated both on chain and in the Lightning Network that allows us to have assets that are outside of Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network.
Is it then also possible to like pay in a stable coin and directly convert that somehow to Bitcoin if it kind of integrates with the Taproot asset?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, that's the way that the protocol is built in itself, is that there's things called like edge nodes that can basically do that conversion automatically as far as a payment goes. So being able to like have a Lightning invoice generated, maybe it's for a Tether invoice, and being able to pay that invoice with Bitcoin, and then vice versa, generating a Bitcoin invoice and paying it with Tether. That's all built into the protocol, which is, I think, pretty unique and a pretty awesome value add.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be because there's a lot of fiat still around, and I think it will be around for a long time still, like for quite a long time. So integrating Bitcoin as deep as possible with fiat is actually good for Bitcoin to leverage the whatever technology we have to get more volume, mean of exchange volume, but also store value volume to Bitcoin. I think that's I never looked at that like that way. If you like, you just have USDC or like UST or like some form of stable coin, and you're like, oh, like let's pay someone, and the other one directly gets it in Bitcoin, or you can really quickly swap it without transaction fees or like without a conversion or exchanges or anything like that. It just makes the whole industry probably a little bit better and more integrated. I love the idea of that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it makes a much more integrated experience, and it's one of the really great things of like Bitcoin or the Lightning Network has about $500 million of capacity in it today. That can all be used for stablecoin movement, right away. And so it enables us to leverage the existing liquidity that exists in the network without having to stand up, deploy another 500 million to be able to do stablecoin movement. So it's really awesome because we can leverage the existing network that we have, and we don't have to create an entire new one.
So like we can already use that and kind of, that's an interesting thought also. It's also the payment if is super interesting, because is it also possible to just like pay Bitcoin and the other one gets USDC, or like the other one, like you can also flip it probably on its head? Are there any apps and stuff like that they already integrate? Voltage probably, like how is the ecosystem from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely early for the ecosystem, as Tether, just kind of supported it and announced support just a couple of weeks ago. But people like us, like we're definitely adding support for Taproot assets. There's people like Jolts that are a kind of a wallet SDK for Taproot assets. I know that we have quite a few partners that are very interested in adopting it. So it's early in terms of the support, but we see that shaping up pretty quickly. And we are definitely working on our strategy for that as well.
Yeah, it could be an interesting play point for Bitcoin, because I'm also like I'm thinking of like pay. I'm thinking of, like, I'm getting now my first employees and trying to figure out how to set this up, and they're not all in the same region like me. Like the first one that I'm thinking about, he's in Colombia, and and for him it's both possible Bitcoin or dollars, but he said like dollars would be easier on his side. So like getting dollars to him, but maybe like if I can just send my Bitcoin and he gets it directly in dollars in his wallet, like those use cases are super interesting for Bitcoin operating businesses, where they can plug into some really nice thing, some app where they get directly US dollar in their wallets, or like spendable US dollars equivalents. But you as a Bitcoin business, because I get my income in Bitcoin, so I also want to pay in Bitcoin. You can just pay in Bitcoin, a Bitcoin address, and it kind of converts that. I think those integrations are super interesting for the let's say 5, 10, 20 years to come, because we need those. Like there are some Bitcoiners out there and say like, oh, it's Bitcoin or like ride or die with Bitcoin, and we don't want to touch fiat at all. So they're like very against stable coins. They're very against anything that has fiat all over it, or like even crypto. And I think in the medium term, it's a mistake. I think we have to be open to fiat, to integrate it, and to kind of infiltrate it, like almost like a Trojan horse to fiat. And I love those applications where we kind of have to get in there. We have to be the most open protocol. We have to be the most open ecosystem, because the most open ecosystem will win in the end. That's why open source better we closed sourced. And I love the idea of that. I said that I think like 5 times now, but I love I never heard that idea, and I'm really fascinated by it, and really excited to hear that you're working on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we're very excited about it as well, and I think that it will unlock a kind of a new phase of growth for the network in general. And and that's one of the great things about it, is that if you want to use Bitcoin and never touch stablecoins or anything like that, you can totally do it. It's not like a requirement to like support stablecoins in Bitcoin as well. So I think that's a great advantage of anyone that doesn't want it, doesn't have to use it. So I think it'll be a really good unlock for the ecosystem, and let a lot of people kind of choose what assets they want to move, when and how, and all of those things.
Really cool. Is there anything else that you're really excited about in the near term future in Bitcoin or Bitcoin and or Lightning?
Yeah, I mean, I think that overall, like we're excited to go through this year and really push the boundaries of adoption and get a lot more companies involved. And then we're got a huge amount of kind of announcements and press releases coming up soon that we're really excited about as well. And then finally, we have a new product that we'll be releasing the next month or two. That we're very excited about. We're excited about all of these things, but overall, I think that there's not a ton that we can share at this point, but we have a lot of things coming down the pipeline, and it'll be a really, really good year in 2025. And that's something that we are excited about, both from being able to increase the network as a whole, get more people involved, as well as some of the things that we've been working on for a while now.
Super interesting. One more thing that I want to get into the podcast is when do you see, or like what event or like what has to happen in order to see a major spike of medium exchange? Right now, it's still like a small use case for Bitcoin. Most Bitcoiners just hold Bitcoin and don't touch it and use like a fiat system to do that. What do you see as kind of the milestones that has to happen for that to change, that Bitcoin is really used as a medium of exchange in a major way?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean, I think that it's a couple things. I think that one, like it doesn't like the whole medium of exchange. I think is like people kind of tie medium of exchange to Lightning specifically, where I don't necessarily see that is a requirement, because there's people like two exchanges transferring value in Bitcoin between each other that could be like $5 million payments. You can still do that faster and cheaper than you can on chain. So there's still a huge amount of value in doing that alone. But then I think something that like it's a somewhat of a U.S. based answer, but I think some of like the tax laws that are like very unhelpful for like everyday spendings. Like technically today in the U.S., if you pay for something with $5 in Bitcoin, you have to. That's like a capital gains event. You have to pay taxes on extra taxes besides your sales tax on the conversion of when you bought the Bitcoin and then when you like transacted with it, which is pretty kind of ridiculous. It's not actually. It's very I think that's one of the reasons why people have really not been very interested in spending it in that way, because it's just the system isn't made to support that. I think that could go a long way in increasing the exchange of Bitcoin in kind of more everyday use cases. And I think it's ultimately just continuing to increase the amount of like the user experience of both Lightning and like getting more people involved, making it easier and easier and easier to use, which is something we're certainly working on. And then finally, I think that the like we were talking about with stablecoins on Lightning, I think that that's going to be a big unlock for getting it more used in a day to day, where people might start with stablecoins on Lightning and then ultimately move into Bitcoin as they start to see the value. And like, hey, as for my business, I would love to be able to start accumulating Bitcoin and doing that because we see it appreciating over time. So I think it'll be there's several kind of steps that we need to get to making it more and more accessible. I think that's been historically pretty hard for all of those reasons, but I think we're chipping away at them one at a time.
That's super interesting. Yeah, like we come closer and closer, and like chipping them away. Really interesting. One question I asked each and every one of my guests is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think that I do quite a bit of just kind of the startup, I guess, mentoring and education of just how do you build a company from 0 to 1, and how do you scale it and do all these different things. Something I've learned about over time, and then I think just I do a lot of similar on just kind of software engineering. That's where my background. I don't do much software engineering anymore because I've kind of moved into more of the business side of things. But I think software engineering and building companies are things that I'm very interested in, outside of just Bitcoin specifically.
I think building startups in Bitcoin is quite unique with like the different hurdle rate of investors. If someone invests in a Bitcoin startup, they obviously get Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is a very attractive kind of cash reserve if you see it as a cash reserve. What kind of interesting or unique things about investing in a Bitcoin startup, or like the Bitcoin startup world in itself, do you kind of see in the space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it. Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it's honestly really challenging because like startups are already like risky and hard and all of these things, and then when you add Bitcoin to it, it makes it much harder, and it makes it much more risky and all of these things, because like, as much as we all like love and like believe in Bitcoin, it is still like, especially to investors, it's still very early. And like, how, like, what scale does Bitcoin ultimately reach? Is it going to take over the world? Is it going to stay the same size? Like, all these questions from like an investor standpoint are very much in their minds. And so it can be very challenging to run a Bitcoin company, because you're kind of like doubling or quadrupling like the risk and like all of the considerations that need to go into it. So it's challenging, but that's something that you can work through in a couple ways of in like a business model perspective, or the way that you kind of pitch or talk about your company. So there's some ways of increasing that, or bettering your odds of getting funding or just becoming a successful business. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it is definitely a challenge, and definitely a unique opportunity in building a company in Bitcoin, because we're still new. Bitcoin's 15 years old, but we're still figuring things out as we go. There's still a lot of unknowns and stuff to build, and so there's an inherent kind of risk. If we were building things for like the telecom phone systems, that's a little bit more understood. That's been around for many, many years, and I think that's really been de-risked in a lot of ways. We're doing something that's completely brand new, and so there's a lot of risk that comes with that.
Do you have a lot of investors in startups, or do you see a lot of investors in startups that don't get Bitcoin to this point? It's like, do you see some investors that want to invest in Bitcoin startups but are not into Bitcoin? Is that a thing?
It's a good question. I think that we've seen most investors at least like understand Bitcoin, that want to invest in Bitcoin companies. There's a lot of them that don't only do Bitcoin. They do like, every other chain, or they do a bunch of other just general crypto stuff. And Bitcoin is just one of those opportunities inside of their broader portfolio. I haven't seen as many people that like completely don't understand Bitcoin, or like just aren't that interested in it, investing in the companies. I think that there has to probably be some correlation there of people being like interested in Bitcoin and the value it brings, and then investing in those companies that are kind of bringing it into the market.
Yeah, makes sense, because like, why would I invest in a Bitcoin company if I don't believe in Bitcoin? It's like, like if they work in Bitcoin, it kind of doesn't make sense for me to invest. It's like I don't believe in the internet, but I invest in Amazon. It wouldn't make sense for me at all. Like, if I don't think that the internet will get adopted. Really cool. We have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. The question is not limited to Bitcoin, and today it's also not a Bitcoin question. The question is, what inspires you most on a daily basis?
That's a good question. So I think I think I would say it's two things. One is just, I think like solving hard problems is like the thing that I just love to do. And I think that bringing Bitcoin, both starting a company, scaling a company, and then bringing Bitcoin into the world, into mass adoption, are two incredibly hard problems to solve. And so those are things that that really drive me every day, is trying to solve problems. And I think that it's not only that, but it's also solving problems that I think add value to the world. I think that Bitcoin can actually add value to a lot of people's lives, a lot of people's businesses. It can be a huge amount of opportunity, and solving hard problems for kind of that good of changing people's lives, or making things better for particular people is very interesting. So I'd say that's kind of one of the things that really drives me, is just solving problems. That's what I love to do. And then the second one I would say is just my family. I mean, my family is the thing that has driven me through the entire kind of journey of starting a company and whatnot. And just doing it for them is also a big driver that inspires me to continue to go.
Absolutely. Really, really cool. I love those points. Thank you so much, Graham, for being on. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Graham again. You can find me on Twitter at GKRIZEK. Our company is Voltage. You can find us at voltage.cloud is our website. The Twitter is voltage_cloud. Hit us up, go to our website, just check out what we're doing. And would love to help anyone that's looking to integrate Bitcoin and Lightning and continue to scale the network.
Really cool. Thank you so much for being on, Graham. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.